Hello, my name is Trenoweth, and tonight I'm going to be talking about astrology and education, and I hope you enjoy this talk. It's something that's really near and dear to my heart, and it's about the research that I've been doing. In addition to being an astrologer, I'm also a professional school teacher, which I've been doing for the past Saturn cycle, which is about 30 years, and I've had various different schools that I've worked at, and I've taught various different subjects. So here I am in different guises, teaching different subjects, including primary school. I'm one of the few teachers that you'll meet who have taught children all the way from the ages of 3 all the way up to 18. So I have quite a lot of experience and quite a lot of interest. I was banned from teaching astrology in school and even banned from telling people that I was an astrologer in case parents complained about me making predictions, which is quite funny considering how many grade predictions I make per year as a secondary school teacher. If you think about it, I had 500 students per half term, and 6 times a year I make these grade predictions. So I was making a lot of predictions as a teacher, and what I said as a teacher, making my predictions could do a lot more damage to a child's future than anything I could have set up as an astrologer. So when I started teaching primary school, I started thinking about ways I could bring astrology into school without getting myself into trouble. And one of the things I tried to do was a lunar gardening experiment. So here we are planting by the moon in my cohort, my year cohort. About 90 children took part in this experiment. Not quite a scientific experiment because there are a lot of variables in there that affected the outcome of the experiment. But we did plant seeds at the same time with different elements involved in this. So, education hasn't changed much in the past 200 or so years. And what's happening now is that we're undergoing this shift in the Saturn Jupiter conjunctions. So from the late, in the 19th century, all the way up till now, we've had the Saturn Jupiter conjunctions, which takes place every 20 years. They've always occurred in earth signs. And then in 1980, it was back to air signs for once, and then one more time back into earth signs in 2000. And from 2020 in December, we're going to have the Saturn-Jupiter conjunctions for the next 200 years in the element of air. So right now, we're undergoing this great change in how we teach our children, I think, because Jupiter is about how we learn and Saturn is about how we discipline. So we're going through this great change, and I think it's very exciting. But, obviously we have the virus that's causing schools to close down. And so it's been quite a great worry for us as well. One of the things I have been saying for many years is that our technological knowledge is going to become more important in how we educate our children, because the Saturn-Jupiter conjunction in December is in the sign of Aquarius, which is ruled by Uranus, which is to do with technology. So great changes coming up, and we're just going to have to understand and move with the times. So back, when the modern education system started, we were preparing children for working in factories. Good behavior was defined as sitting down, being quiet, and doing your work. One teacher taught 30 students. They all learned at the same rate. But this is terribly old-fashioned now that we're coming into this new age. So what we have to do is we have to understand what is going on in the skies and use this knowledge to help us educate our children. So what we've seen in schools in the past few years is that we've taken away the funding for arts and such as music, physical education, and we want students to learn the basics, reading, writing, and maths, and a little bit of science. But we weren't prepared to integrate arts. Art is first place where the funding is taken away. And I have a lot to say about funding, which I'll be getting into in a minute. But now that we're in lockdown, when home education has become more important, when students are actually creating a more bespoke education for themselves, they're starting to become more interested in these art subjects, which I know lockdown isn't great. I know home education isn't great because we put too much expectation on parents, but it does allow the child to be more independent in their learning. So back in the 60s, the student was always blamed for the bad grades. And now, before lockdown, the teacher was always being held responsible. So what I think is going to be becoming more clear as time goes on, from the Saturn-Jupiter conjunction in Aquarius, is that students will become more independent. So teachers get the blame, and we see a lot of this online. People have told me to get back to work when I know that schools aren't safe, for example. It's been quite a struggle. And I know my fellow teachers are struggling as well. And we're going to come into this time where I think students have to become more self-reliant, and we need to teach them the skills of how to not so much teach themselves, but know what their interests are and know how to research those interests and how to help themselves to learn and to know who to go to. And they're going to have to start sorting out what the truth is and how to tell a fact from something that may be not quite so true, just because somebody says it is. So currently in the educational system, before lockdown, a lot of teachers were leaving the profession before they actually got good at it. So you know that when you start to learn something, that it takes practice to become good. But with teachers, what was happening is we would spend an enormous amount of time training new teachers, but they realized quickly that the profession made too many demands on them, and they left the profession almost as quickly as they got into it. So what was happening was we were having an influx of very young teachers. God bless you, young teacher, we love you, but they were also leaving the profession just as quickly. So what I discovered through a lot of years of experience in the classroom is that a little astrology can make everyone happier in the classroom. And so this is a little bit of a story of how I think that can happen. So Alex shouldn't be using astrology in the classroom. As I said, I was banned from using astrology. I was told in no uncertain terms, if someone complained about me being an astrologer, a parent complained about me, I could lose my job. Well, initially, telling me I can't do something is a sure way of guaranteeing I'm going to find a way of squeezing it in. So I had to find a way of working astrology into my practice. And I started off using star signs because we have the student's date of birth. And I thought in my early days of teaching, it would be a great idea if I arranged my seating plan according to star signs. So what I did was I had one column of students who were the fire signs, Aries, Leo, Sagittarius. And the next column, I'd have them be the earth signs, Taurus, Virgo, Capricorn. The next row along, I have them be the air signs, the Geminis, the Libras, and the Aquarians. And the final row being the water signs, which are Cancer, Scorpio, and Pisces. Well, never ever do that, because what happened was the fire signs, of course, took over the classroom, and the air signs shouted over the earth signs to find out what was going on, and it became a lot of chaos. So the fire signs took over, the air signs were shouting over. The earth signs just kind of sat there in silent shock, and the water signs started hugging themselves and rocking to self-soothe. So if you're listening to me, and just don't do that. It's not a great idea. I had to find a better way of using astrology. So what I found was one day I thought to myself, I can't take this anymore. This is ridiculous. I'm tired, emotionally exhausted as well. I'm not enjoying this scenario of being in a situation of teaching teenagers, and I had to find a way of reaching them. And I at that time I couldn't, and I thought, this is silly. I'm not. You can't pay me enough to do this anymore. So I decided I was going to leave the profession. And one day, I even remember what I was teaching. I was talking about Macbeth, and I looked out at my class, and I thought how much I was going to miss them if I could never teach again. But I just knew that I was faced with an impossible task. But as I looked out at the sweet little faces of these 14-year-olds, I realized, hold on, you guys, because you're all born in the same year, we teach you by year group. Your year has an astrological signature, and that is by Jupiter and Saturn, because they would be roughly in the same signs. So this led to me to create a sort of cheat sheet for every year group. So when I taught year 7, they're new to our school. We don't know them very well. We have very little information coming from the primary school. But if I know where their Jupiter sign is, I don't have to involve myself in the trial and error technique of understanding how they learn. If I understand their Jupiter, I know how they learn. If I understand their Saturn, then I know how they perceive me as a disciplinarian. So what I do every year is I create a little cheat sheet. This helps me to understand who I'm teaching, what they need, where they need the support, and how I, as the disciplinarian, can help them to learn. And so these are just through the years for this academic year. So I'm all for anything that makes my job easier as a teacher. This is why I survived the profession for so long. Most teachers leave in 5 years. I've lasted for 20. So I also like to work with what I call triangulation. So that's working with astrological theory, statistics, and looking at what outside resources say. So I started with psychology because I was a psychology major at university. I started learning behavioral psychology, which involves a lot of statistics. And one of the people I came across in my psychological education was Jean Piaget. So he was born in the late 19th century. He started being interested in natural philosophy and natural history. And he began developing his theory through watching children in his family, his nieces and nephews. And Albert Einstein said his theory was so simple, only a genius could come up with it. So he taught, he believed that students, children learned in stages. And so I borrowed heavily from Jean Piaget. And his theory of cognitive development said that at the young age, the sensory motor age, first Jupiter square, children are learning how to experience the world through touch, through tasting, through hearing. And the next stage of development, excuse me, was the pre-operational stage, which is approximately from 2 to 7 years old. And they have a deepening but still developing sense of logic at this stage. Then he moved on to concrete operational, which is roughly between the ages of 7 to 11, where they have rigid beliefs, but they're less egocentric. And then they have a formal operational stage from 11 years old all the way up to adulthood. So I was very taken by this idea of stages, and I started to look at the astrology stages as well. So the formal operational stage is abstract ideas and deductive reasoning is starting to develop. So he focused on qualitative research, what he observed and what he thought was a pattern that was developing, not so much statistics, which appealed to me at that stage of my education because I disliked behavioral psychology because of all the stats. Now, my very good friend, Sam Reynolds, says to me, be careful what you hate because it'll come back and get you. And as you'll see in a few minutes, stats came back and got me in a very big way. And now I love statistics and I work a lot with numbers. And Piaget also believed that our beliefs, the beliefs that we learn from our parents, we would find a way of assimilating and accommodating other people's beliefs, but we would never stray far away from what we were taught when we were very young. Erik Erikson was another psychologist that had a very big influence. Same sort of thing. He believed people worked in stages. So his stages of life suggest two extremes are held in tension until the individual accepts both are useful and required. And as a result of this resolution, a virtue is developed. And I wrote a book called Growing Pains, which is very much about looking at the hard transiting aspects. So it is this tension that the planets are pushing onto us that force us to make a decision about how we're going to resolve this. So just very quickly looking at his model, for example, trust versus mistrust. So say a mother is holding the baby trusts that the mom is going to hold it and keep it safe. Well, if she drops the baby or there's some sort of accident and the baby gets injured, the baby is going to not trust its mother. But if the baby learns that the mother is safe, then the basic virtue of hope will be developed. And so this goes all the way through life, where we learn different stages. Now, he wasn't quite so locked into ages as Piaget, because he said, they were very fluid, the boundaries. But he had this idea that we worked through the same order of these stages throughout our lives. So that got me thinking about Jupiter. What is the planet that rules learning? Some people say it's Mercury, and I don't think that it is Mercury. I think it's Jupiter. And this is the reason. Mercury rules rote learning. So a teacher will hold up the letter T, and the children in the class will say T, 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 and that's how they learn the sounds of letters. But the Jupiter is when they put those sounds of letters to form words, and they put the words together to form sentences, and the sentences form paragraphs. And so the child learns in leaps and bounds, as what we would expect Jupiter is. It's about taking risks and sticking your neck out and having that leap of faith. Mythologically, Jupiter is thunderbolts and lightning. Children who have experienced their first Jupiter return at the age of 12 have a lot of energy. They're coming into a new school. They're meeting new friends. They get into a lot of play fights. This kind of matches what we would expect in the mythological Jupiter and children's behavior. I know from behavior reports that children are more likely to be in trouble for disruption at this age. Astronomically, Jupiter has a lot of things going on around it. It has its many moons, it has captured asteroids, and everything moves in different directions, but there is an order, there's a way of, Jupiter has a way of managing it. So it's confidence as well. And so this is that leap of faith I was telling you about. It's that belief that you're going to take that risk and jump over to the other side, and you're going to be safe. So the key Jupiter stages, so just applying Piaget's and Erickson's ideas of stages. So the first Jupiter square, from birth to about the age of 3. So at the end of the first Jupiter square, roughly around the age of 3, we normally expect children to be toilet trained. We expect them to be able to speak and be understood by someone who's not their parent or carer. We expect them to be able to ambulate with confidence, and they have a lot of questions, and they have their imaginary friends. So if you think about it, as a child becomes more independent, they need less equipment. So that frees up their parents as well. So they don't have to carry around diapers anymore. They don't have to carry around a stroller or a playpen. The child is more independent and is able to explore a bit more freely. These are key words for Jupiter. At the age of 6, they're starting to learn how to read and write. They're developing their fine motor skills. So the Jupiter opposition at the age of 6 is when we expect children to engage with language. Now, I know that not all schools follow this exactly. For example, the Steiner schools and the Montessori schools have a more, they're not quite so pushy with reading and writing. But if you attend a standard public school in America, you are expected to learn how to read and write when you're 6. And they still have their imaginary friends. I mention this for a reason, and that's because at the waning Jupiter square, I'm talking about transiting Jupiter to its natal position, we expect children to be able to distinguish between real life and fantasy. So children are no longer afraid of the boogeyman under the bed. They are afraid of real fears. Their parents getting divorced. They're afraid of dying, or the parents dying, or they're afraid of terrorism. And I really worry about how children who are experiencing the pandemic are experiencing the world at this age, because the fear must be very great for them, as it is for other children, but particularly at the age of 9, where they're starting to work out what is real and what isn't real. When I taught this year group, I love to tell stories. And what I found out with this year group is that they were the only year group who asked me, is this story real or are you making it up? For every other year group, whether they're 18-year-olds or 3-year-olds, I could tell a story and that question wouldn't come up. But with the 9, 10-year-olds, it was something that always came up. They also display an intense revulsion of the opposite sex. Now, the Jupiter return is when we send them to the middle schools or the secondary schools, and that's around the age of 12 years, 11 years, 8 months is the average. And this is where they meet lots of different kinds of people. People have different religions to them, people who have traveled to different parts of the world, people who have experienced a different upbringing than they do. So that's around the age of 12. And those are the key Jupiter stages up to the age of 12. So Saturn also creates a framework as well. Now, Saturn's completely opposite to Jupiter. Whereas Jupiter is about extending the boundaries, Saturn's about restricting them and keeping us safe. So our parents will tell us, no, you can't do that, more often than they will tell us, yes, you can do that. So our parents telling us no will eventually become the voice that we hear in our heads. You know, you're not good enough, it's not safe, you can't do that, you're going to look like a fool. So this is the voice that becomes that authoritative voice that we hear when we get to reach maturity. But this voice also keeps us safe. It stops us from making a fool of ourselves. It stops us from getting hurt. So this is just kind of a joke about how people perceive teachers, you know, that we are all strict and we all, you know, all about sucking the joy out of life. Well, I don't think that teachers are, or parents are this. But we do want to keep people from getting hurt. But by overdoing our own Saturns, we are actually preventing our children from seeing the world the way they want to see it. So I advise parents to understand their Saturn first, as well as teachers. Understand how you limit yourself, because you don't want to limit children. You want to keep them safe, but you don't want to stop them learning. So key Saturn stages, the first Saturn square at the age of 7, they're capable of telling the time, they understand right from wrong, and their milk teeth are starting to come out and their adult teeth are starting to come in. So Saturn rules the hard parts of the body, the skin, teeth, bones, and usually there's, you can tell a 7-year-old, for example, because they're missing the front teeth. At the age of 13 to 15, with an ephemeris, you can check out the exact time. But this is when teenagers start to, those adult teeth that came in, sometimes they need orthodontic work. Here in England, we expect students to begin to choose their exam subjects. So they also change in their mood. Instead of being exuberant and excited, they become quite sullen and melancholy and very moody as well. You can see a clear shift in how they view the world. At the age of 21, even Aristotle noticed that this is when the wisdom teeth come in, which can quite often mess up the orthodontics that the children have had when they were teenagers. But they're usually settled in work, they're finishing off university, or they're finding a job that they really enjoy. And finally, the Saturn opposition. Now, if you look in Astro Twitter, you hear a lot about, oh, the Saturn return is going to be the worst year of your life. It's completely terrible. But if you understand your Saturn, by the time you reach your Saturn return, you're going to graduate your Saturn, and you're going to feel a sense of accomplishment and achievement. So it doesn't have to be a terrible experience. It can actually be something quite joyful and something that gives you a feeling that you've done something really, really well. So Jupiter stages are every 3 years and Saturn stages are every 7 years, all the way through to the rest of your life. So around the age of 60, you're going to get that double Jupiter return, the 5th Jupiter return, and the 2nd Saturn opposition, which is the age of wisdom. So if Jupiter is every 3 years, the critical stages are going to be, so if you have Jupiter in Aries, the next Jupiter square, transiting Jupiter square, will be in Cancer. The opposition will be in Capricorn. and the closing square would be in Libra. So what happens here is that the modality of the signs become quite important. The same goes for fixed signs. What I found with fixed sign learners is that they are often very reluctant to move on from what they were learning previously into learning new things. The cardinal signs were very keen on competing and trying new things, but the fixed signs is where they want to slow down and have time to digest a new learning. The mutable signs, I found that these learners did not like competing, especially academic competition, because they always felt like they're not quite measuring up. They like to be smart. All these signs are ruled by Jupiter and Mercury. So they liked to, they were very self-reliant, and they didn't like other people to know what they were doing. They quickly polarized into very keen and eager learners, and those learners who were very shy and didn't, who felt that they were inadequate. They weren't learning quickly enough. And that may or may not be true, but that's how I observed them. In terms of their academic learning, they were very sensitive about their how quickly or not they learned. So this is just a summary of these key stages for Jupiter. So the first waxing Jupiter square at 3, the first Jupiter opposition at 6, then they had the waxing Saturn square at 7, the first waning Jupiter square at 9, they had a Jupiter return at 12, and a Jupiter Uranus sextile happening at the same time at 13 to 14. And this was the age group that most teachers don't like to teach, because this is when children become quite defiant. And socially, they start to change as well. They start to listen more to their peers than they listen to their parents. And then the Saturn opposition at the age of 15. And as I say, this cycle goes on throughout your life. So using qualitative research, I found that the year group teachers were less likely to enjoy teaching were the 13 and 14-year-olds. So adult decision-making is kind of a paradox, because we expect children, because they're getting a bit bigger, that they'll be able to make decisions. But what we know from studying adolescent behavior is that adolescents show extremely high rates of poor decision-making. So as a society, we respond by making driving. You can't drive a car until you're 16. You can't vote or make a lot of adult decisions until you're 18. In a lot of states, you can't drink alcohol until you're 18. You can rent a car from a commercial agency at 25. However, you can also be tried as a murderer if you commit that sort of crime at the age of 14. So, you know, we have a lot of different expectations. And if you want to hear more about child murderers, you can look at my book, Growing Pains, which I go into this quite extensively. So adolescent brain development. So the brain develops from the base of the spine upwards and forward. So what is being, what part of the brain that children use at a young age is the sort of reptilian inner part of the brain, which is to do with how you react to situations. It's reflexes. And so the age of the brain develops, as I said, from the inner part of the brain and outward. So you can see the red part of the brain is the reflexive part of the brain. And as this child gets older, the prefrontal cortex starts to develop, and this child or this woman can actually predict the future. She can see the consequences of her behavior as she gets older. And this comes from this website here. So if you'd like to learn more information about this, you can go to this website and read more intensively about this. We also know that girls start the brain development before boys. So this is one of the reasons why I recommend, and I can't believe I'm saying this actually, I recommend that the genders are separated in early adolescence. So around the age of middle school time, I recommend that boys and girls are separated. This allows the girls to learn. It allows them to get used to their bodies and find comfort in other women, other girls, whereas the boys can play, fight, and do all the things they need to do, and then they'll settle down and be ready to learn in a couple years. And so I'm proposing, or say, that it's important for the genders to be separated, but then be brought back together in high school. So what's going on is that the brain is rewiring itself. I talked about the leap of faith. And so you have the synaptic cleft here. So this is like the leap of faith that occurs in brain development. There has to be a leap here to get the messages through. And what I tell parents is that the brain rewiring itself is kind of like the metaphor of a mansion with new carpeting and you have muddy shoes. So as you move through the house, you're wearing down the carpet, and the parts of the house where the carpet is worn is, you can see that this part of the house is being used more often. But at around the age of 15, the Saturn opposition, the doors to the unused rooms close. And it doesn't mean that those doors won't open again, but it does mean that those doors are more difficult to open. So I encourage parents to do things like take their children on trips, to allow them to learn new languages, to explore new religions, because you don't want them doing the same thing over and over and over again, because they won't be able to access the parts of the brains that will open up the world for them. If you look on Wikipedia, you can check out your favorite singer or your favorite actor, and you can see that this person got their start in life around the age of 11 or 12. Someone gave them a guitar, someone gave them singing lessons, and it opened up the world for them. So a little homework for you. We also know from brain development that if we know that a child has been neglected who has suffered neglect in some way, we know that it affects the brain development. And when these children come to us in secondary school, middle school, we know that, for example here, this child here is severely neglected. So this shows that reptilian part of the brain being overstimulated. And here's a normal child. So if we know this, we can help this child to develop faster, and we can have that window of opportunity, and we can help that child develop the brain so that they can catch up with their peers. If we don't understand or don't know, or this child's particularly quiet, or whatever's going on their life, we don't understand, there's nothing we can do to help them. So it's really important for information between elementary schools and middle schools to be very clear, so we can help identify these children. But the transition process, which is what this is called, means that many primary school teachers will think that a child needs a fresh start in a secondary school. So that information that we need so badly in secondary school doesn't filter through. So a lot of these children can become those invisible children, and they can miss out on this opportunity. But if we have this information, we could do something about it. So after the age of 15, in other words, after the first Saturn opposition, the human brain becomes more fixed and rigid. And then the habits of a lifetime are formed during adolescence. So behavior is our biggest concern when we're teaching. And I'm just going to read this to you here. For example, a study of a sample of teachers shows that they have problems with discipline. So many administrators want to require these teachers to take additional courses in school discipline. Look what happens. The college courses on discipline encourage teachers to develop more rules and ultimately become more controlling, making them less effective in a classroom. So if you're a teacher and you can't control your class and you fail an inspection, what will happen is you're going to be having to be observed more often. And if you fail the second observation, you'll probably be put on probation, which means you're under more pressure and will have more observations. So controlling a class becomes very important. So what I'm saying as an astrologer, if you understand your own Saturn, your own limitations, what you need to do as a disciplinarian, then you can understand what your class needs as well. And if you can understand what your class needs through their Jupiter, you can work towards having that Jupiter work in your favor. So here's an example of a class gone bad. A nightmare for any teacher. And as I said at the very start, good behavior is sitting down, being quiet, and doing your work. It has nothing to do with being able to explore what you're interested in. It's following a certain curriculum that hasn't been laid out with the child's interests. It's to do with, what administrators think is important for exams. So in my role as a teacher, one of the things I had was a lot of behavior reports. So these behavior reports are generated when a child is misbehaving. A teacher gives the child a formal warning. You are being disruptive. If you continue doing this, I'm going to give you an incident sheet, for example. So what this year shows, so this is half term 6. So this would be in June and July. Here in England, we're still in school in June and July. So at half term 6, 2011, what this shows is that children who have their Jupiter return have the most incident sheets. So in year 7, you can almost see it happening. They come into school, they have to be 11 to start secondary school. And not all of them will have had their Jupiter return. But as the year goes on, more and more of those children will have their Jupiter returns. So the year group as a whole kind of hits this tipping point. And by the end of year 7, it becomes very chaotic indeed. And so therefore, a lot more children by percentage are getting incident sheets. And age 14, when I was telling you about the 13, 14-year mark with the Jupiter and Uranus sextile their natal points, can also be quite difficult. But you see here at the age of 15 with the Saturn opposition, those incident sheets drop right down because of the Saturn opposition. And it's the same thing year after year. So this is a bit more prominent the following year, the following cohort, a lot more incident sheets, but still it drops off at around the age of the Saturn opposition. So then I thought, okay, I got all this behavior data, so why don't I look at what children are getting in trouble for? So 12 and 13, the Jupiter return and the sextile to Jupiter as well, they're more in trouble for disruption or disruptive behavior, and not so much at 14 or 15. Okay, so then I looked at this one. So this is the same, tells you the same information for the following half terms. So 37.5% of the children were more in trouble for disruption. And then the following year, the same thing. So these show, this is replicated 4 times. So then I wanted to ask, well, when are they in trouble for inadequate work? So I found that the Saturn opposition children were more often in trouble for not doing their homework, not doing their coursework. So based on what I've told you about brain development, this is kind of a tragedy, because instead of focusing on getting those younger adolescents to have more opportunities to learn, what we're doing is we're putting all our funding into revision for the exam years. So we're kind of working against ourselves in terms of developing academic skills. So children from the academic point of view, at the age of 15, the Saturn opposition, are more likely to get in trouble for not following through with their exam work. And here's that replicated 4 times. It's the same thing. It shows the same pattern. So if we can predict grades, can we predict behavior? So with all this behavior data, I thought to myself, wow, I've got some really interesting things going on here. So as a behavior manager, we were all in charge of our own academic year. I mean, my colleagues we were each in charge of an academic year. And we were having a really bad day. All these incident sheets were coming in, and we were just wondering what's going on. You know, what is happening? Why, you know, why is everybody suddenly gone a bit crazy? And my colleague, who knew I was an astrologer, turned to me and said, you know, it must be a full moon. And I thought to myself, but it's not a full moon, it's a new moon. And I thought to myself, this would be a really great study if I could ever find the time to analyze all this data. Well, eventually I did start looking at, do children misbehave more at the new moon or the full moon? Now, I have a lot of data to go through, and I've gone through 2 non-academic years, and I found that children do misbehave more at the new moon than the full moon. And when the moon is furthest away from the ecliptic, not the eclipses, is when they misbehave. And so we get this notion of communal reinforcement, which is kind of reinforced all the way through literature. You know, for example, in Othello, Shakespeare wrote of the moon at a lower latitude. It is the very error of the moon. She comes more near the earth than she was wont, and makes men mad. And Aristotle and Pliny the Elder also suggested that the moist nature of the brain meant that it was subject to lunar influences. However, the astronomer Larry Sessions of Astronomy Essentials points out that although so-called supermoons, the perigee syzygy, have an effect on the perigean tides, the actual effect of the lunar pull on humans will be minimal. So I wanted to test this out. And so I divided the lunar month into these sections here. And I wanted to ask the question, do children misbehave more at the new moon or the full moon? And what I found is they misbehave more at the new moon. I even separated boys from girls, and I still found the same effect. And then here it is, I took the girls out so we can exclude menstrual cycles and all that kind of stuff. And I was still finding that boys are misbehaving more at the new moon than the full moon. And I also looked at new moons at higher latitude, and it was still showing me that the new moon is when they misbehaved. Now this data is quite vintage now, and I'm still analyzing what I have. I have all the way up to 2014. So I still have a lot more to look at. So these are just preliminary results. Here it is replicated, still showing the new moon at higher latitude. And then here's my beautiful p-values, which, just to say it again, this might not hold through all the years that I have. Up until my research, there was one other non-astrologer doing this kind of work. He had, I think he had fewer than 500 incident sheets over 1/2 term. So about 1 semester. So maybe he had 500 incident sheets, and he was only looking at 1/2 term. Well, I have nearly 30,000 incident sheets over a period of 5 years. So it's a lot of work to look at. So just to reiterate, it's just preliminary research that I found that the new moon is when children misbehave more often. So I started looking at primary school, and I've eliminated new moons and full moons when the children were in school. And I'm still finding that the new moon is when children are more likely to misbehave. Primary school is ages 3 to 11. And this is 2 terms. I'm still finding the new moon is when children misbehave in primary school. So one of the possible reasons why children may be misbehaving more at the new moon than the full moon is because of sleep deprivation. Children, everybody misses about 20 minutes of sleep during the full moon compared with the new moon, which might not sound like a lot, but if you're a teenager, you're already operating on a disturbed circadian cycle, which means that you can't sleep when normal people sleep. You know, instead of wanting to go to bed at 10, you can't go to sleep. You're staying up much, much later. So in the morning, you're not well rested, and we have to go to school early in the morning, right? So the children are coming to school not very well rested. And what did they do? Well, they buy energy drinks to keep them pepped up. Here in England, energy drinks are not legal, but they still get sold, and children still find a way to get their hands on them. So this disturbs the circadian cycle even further. So a tired child, by the end of the week, what do they do at the weekends? Well, they go to bed, they text, to their friends at night, and then they sleep in really late on Saturday, maybe not getting out of bed until noon. On Sunday, the same thing. But then on Monday, they have to go back to school at the same time, very early in the morning. So they have a severely disturbed sleeping cycle, and that we're not quite addressing. I think that there's enough scientific evidence that we can say maybe it's better that teenage children start school later in the day, but we don't seem to be doing this. When school started again after lockdown, we were still expecting children to get to school by 8:30, 9 o'clock in the morning. And the big question I think I have to ask is, why does America or any other country spend more money in incarcerating people than it spends in educating people? And it seems a little backwards, doesn't it? So, in our countries, we kind of treat children like they're prisoners. We tell them when to come to school. We force them to work against their natural cycles. They can't go to the toilet when they want to. They have to ask for permission. They have their lunch all together, eating substandard food. They have to, do what the authority figure says, or there's going to be a great punishment. So we're kind of treating them like prisoners already. So one of the opportunities, I think, of pandemic, and again, I know it's not ideal. I know it's we're all struggling with it, but we have this new way of educating our children, and it's with parental input, and it's allowing the child to be an independent learner, and it's developing those skills that us old teachers can't teach them. So they're allowed to explore the world in a way that we could never give them in a school. So just a couple final questions. It costs £65,000, I'm British, so I say pounds, to put a person into prison, and £40,000 a year to keep them there. But with that money, we could open up new schools or put money into helping that child learn new things. So just looking at some other people's research, Adrian Raine, a British researcher, he found that children who were excessively sleepy during adolescence were more likely to commit crimes at the age of 29. Now, I'm sure Adrian Raine is not an astrologer. He could be, but I'm assuming he's not. So he tested children at the age of 15 that had an opposition, and he tested them again at 29 to work this out. If you were a sleepy adolescent, you're more likely to become in trouble with the law at the Saturn return. So here he is. He based his theory on theta waves and other physiological measurements. And this is just some of his work. You can find his work on YouTube. So isn't it more logical to work towards keeping people out of prison? So just a final thought about serial killers. Everyone knows serial killers are born, not made, right? I mean, everyone knows that. Anyway, let's look at a famous case. So this is a very sweet child, very cute, adorable, isn't he? Well, he grew into Ted Bundy. Ted Bundy had a terrible childhood in terms of he had his mother gave birth to him out of wedlock, and his very strict grandparents insisted that he call his mother his sister. So Ted didn't know that his mother was his mother. He thought that he was raised to believe that that was his sister. And so we know about the terrible crimes that Ted has committed. But born in the same day as him, the same day and same year, is the British novelist Penny Jordan. By contrast to Ted, she had a life that her parents understood, that she loved to read. She was a storyteller. She loved to write. She was winning all sorts of contests. And so one of her books, I thought this is very interesting in terms that she wrote this book called Power Games. And the subtitle says, Power Over Life, Love, and Death. And what Ted said about his terrible crimes was the big payoff for me was actually possessing whatever it was I had stolen. I really enjoyed having something that I had wanted and gone out and taken. Possession proved to be an important motive for rape and murder as well. Sexual assault, he said, fulfilled his need to totally possess his victims. So there might be similar themes in a person's life, but how you actually live out those themes makes the difference. And when we understand that we can help children channel their needs in appropriate ways through understanding their Jupiter and Saturn, we as parents and educators can help those troubled children actually develop into adults who are responsible, who can control themselves, and who can understand another person's vulnerabilities, and they can have empathy and sympathy towards that person. So 251 babies are born per minute worldwide, each being raised by parents in unique circumstances. And there's many, many factors in child development: their environment, their relationship with the parents, their birth order, their diets, their neighborhood, and many others. Some of these things we can do little about, and some of these things require commitment, devotion, and discipline. But if you understand your Saturn, your children will learn to honor their own Saturn. This will permit them to explore the world through their Jupiter, to take reasonable risks it takes to grow and develop, and to realize that life is in a constant state of flux and change. Life is nothing but a roller coaster. And I'm going to leave you with a Bible verse, just something to think about. Comes from the book of Mark. Hearken, behold, there went out a sower to sow. And it came to pass, as he sowed, some fell by the wayside, and the fowls of the air came and devoured it up. And some fell on the stony ground, where it had not much earth, and immediately it sprang up, because it had no depth of earth. But when the sun was up, it was scorched, and because it had no root, it withered away. And some fell among the thorns, and the thorns grew up and choked it, and it yielded no fruit. And others fell on good ground, and did yield fruit, that sprang up and increased, and brought forth, some 30, and some 60, and some 100. And he said unto them, He that hath ears to hear, let him hear. So I think that the astrology, particularly looking at Jupiter and Saturn signs, and helping parents to understand their own Saturn sign so they can allow their child to grow and develop, is going to be incredibly useful. So this is just a kind of a final summary. What happens at the individual stages, or when the individual stages are, all the way up to age of 60. As I kept saying, David, do repeat. Life doesn't stop at 60, it carries on. Every 3 years for Jupiter, every 7 years for Saturn, there's a critical stage. If you want to learn more about what I've been saying, I know I sped through things very quickly, and it's quite late here in England, and I'm a little bit tired. If you want to hear more, I am teaching for Kepler College. I'm doing a 5-week course on this very topic, astrology and adolescence, starting on the 31st of October. So if you're interested, you can contact me here, www.alextrenoweth.co.uk. My book is called Growing Pains, Looking at Astrology and Adolescence. I've also written a Solar Writer Adolescent Astrology Report, which is a report you can either buy the whole program to put on your website to sell these reports, or you can buy the individual reports at this email, www.esotech.com.au. I'm speaking at Breaking Down the Borders. I'm heavily involved in Cosmic Intelligence Agency and the Organization for Professional Astrologers. And you can find me on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. And just to say one more time, there is my website there if you want to contact me. I thank you very much. It's been a very busy day, and thanks for having me.
Great, thank you very much. Any questions from the audience before we end? Carolyn, unmute. Okay.
I would just like to say, Alex, how much I enjoyed that. I'm a retired resource teacher, and you made me remember so much, not that I forget it for long. But I wish I had your information when I was teaching. Thank you.
A lot of people say that to me.
Okay.
Thank you for all your report on social media, all your support. I see you a lot. Thank you.
I refer people that I find excellent.
Thank you.
Okay, would you all please thank Alex Trenoweth?
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I enjoyed it.
Thank you.